This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, best behavior, everybody. We're being recorded. Okay, good. So hope you guys have this Shabbos book. That's what we're working off of. And this is a really excellent. Um, you know, there are 39 malachot of Shabbos, 39 main work categories. As we I think we discussed last week, and I'm not sure if we did. No, we discussed mitzvah in general. So on Shabbos, the idea is not that we stop working. It's not labor. It's not work. It's not toil. Right? Turning on a light switch is no labor, no work, no toil whatsoever, but we can't do it. Right? Walking a mile, how far do you guys walk? 1.3. 2. 1.1. I get off easy over here. Right? So it'd be a lot more restful if we were to get into our cars and drive. Right? The idea is that we do our beliefs. Shabbos is, as we mentioned a number of times, Shabbos is our belief in God as a creator. And therefore, God did not rest on the seventh day. He was not the least bit tired. There was no need to rest. What God did was he stopped shaping the world. He stopped altering the world. He stopped creating. And therefore, the 39 malachot are 39 creative activities where we shape the world to fit our needs. Right? Hitting a light switch is certainly using our prowess, our technology to shape the world to fit our needs. And that's what we stopped doing on Shabbos. Right? David Foreman puts it very well. You know, if you keep creating, if you're an artist and you keep creating, you keep putting more and more and more paint onto your canvas, at a certain point, what happens? It just crashes down, right, under its own weight. So there needs to be a point where we stop, we pause. And that's what Shabbat is. Natalie likes to put it that we disconnect in order to reconnect. Okay, that's what we do. We disconnect from all of the things that busy us in order to reconnect. To reconnect to what? To who? To God, to each other, community, family, friends, ourself. Right? You know, there's it's amazing. It's like people can't have any time just to be alone with himself, right? You know, if I'm online, what do I right? You know, it's like, you know, time to reconnect to ourselves also. That's also important. So the 39 malachot of Shabbos, where do those 39 malachot come from? Where do we get those 39 from? Building the Mishkan, correct. What is the Mishkan Shabbos connection?
We created a place for Hashem. Hashem created a place for us.
Exactly. God, Shabbos creation is God creating a place in his world for us. Mishkan is our creating a place in our world for Hashem. Similar acts of creation. So we look to see, right? Obviously, we don't create, we don't stop creating like God does, but we can look at our act of our parallel creation act, and that's what we will stop doing, those 39 activities on Shabbos. Of those, we have 9 that are, we have 11 that are called Sidura Dapat, which is the order of making bread, okay? And that will start with plowing, planting, harvesting, and then all the types of borer, what's called, you take the pitchfork, you throw it, winnowing, right, and borer, all the way down to baking and cooking. That's a series of 11. There's another series of 13 when it comes to making garments. Okay, what's that going to start with? Trapping an animal. right? In order to get the no, I'm sorry. No. We're dealing with domesticated animals. So that's going to start with probably shearing and then going on onto all of these looming steps. Okay. And there are 11 such steps. That brings us to 24. Then there are 9 when it comes to writing. Okay. What does writing start with? Trapping the animal to get the hide, the cloth, the parchment upon which you're going to be doing your writing. Okay. So that's bringing us up to 33 already. Okay. So those 3 sidurim, those 3 orders get us to 33 of the 39. Then we have, right. And then we have building and deconstructing. Then we have igniting and extinguishing, right? We're up to 37. Then we have hotza'ah, carrying from one domain to another domain. And then we have makeh bepatish, the final blow of the hammer, finishing a kli. Now, many of these don't translate all that much to us when it comes to our somewhat technological, right? We're not out in the farms, right? We're not doing much. We're not spinning our threads and weaving our garments, right? But a lot of them have their applications to us, right? Makeh b'patish, finishing a kli, right? That will apply to, how do you open up a can of tuna fish on Shabbos? What do you mean, Rabbi? Get yourself a can opener and open the can of tuna fish. What's the problem? Well, there is an issue of making a kli, of making a vessel. When you take off that cover, what do you have? You have yourself a vessel. That's why some people won't open up bottle caps on Shabbos. Some people will differentiate between, is it a plastic cap, is it a metal cap? Why? Because by doing so, you're making a kli, you're making a vessel. So there are applications, right? Of course, when it comes to the cooking, that's the main application of the Shabbos laws, right? But there are many, many others along the way. Okay. So let me see. Introduction. Good. Okay. Yeah. So let's get started. Okay. Page 13. Laws of Erev Shabbos. Okay. Already on Erev Shabbos is the eve of Shabbos, Friday afternoon. There are certain things that we want to refrain from doing. Okay. On Friday, page 15, we prepare for the advent of Shabbos, right? Like we are expecting an important guest. Okay. And ideally, one enters Shabbos in a state of purity when one is free from sin. Okay, right? We always try to do that, and we do our best. Okay. Some men have the custom to go to the mikvah every Erev Shabbos, right, to prepare themselves for the Shabbos. Okay. We need to honor the Shabbos, right? So even when one's family or servants can make all the necessary preparations for Shabbos, one should nevertheless prepare at least one thing for Shabbos. The Gemara tells us of different sages. This one would ready the fish. This one would do that. So for most of us, it's not such an issue, right? We don't have too many servants around, and therefore, when it comes to doing things for Shabbos, there are things to do for Shabbos. The truth is, Natalie does all the cooking. I'm pretty useless when it comes to the kitchen, but I do prepare the Shabbos candles. I try to prepare them right when Shabbos ends, prepare for the next Shabbos. So you always want to be doing something to prepare for Shabbos. Okay, you want to do Shabbos for Shabbos needs early on Friday. Okay. All right, yeah, this is all common sense. Winter days are short, right? Do your shopping on Thursday. Fair enough. Okay, so this is important, right? Page 18, right? The Gemara tells us that a person's sustenance, right? Your parnasah, your earnings are all decreed already on Rosh Hashanah, except for two areas, and that comes out of a different account. That has a special allocation account, right? So if you have your money that was destined for you from Rosh Hashanah, the money that you spend on Shabbos and for children's Torah study, right, that does not come off of your cheshbon, that doesn't come out of your account, right? Might look, it comes out of your account, but it comes out of a special account. Okay, so there. Now, a person can freely purchase delicacies and special goods for Shabbos without worrying that one is diminishing one's disposable income. Okay, fair enough, right? Now we have to make sure that we're doing it lichvod Shabbat, for the honor of Shabbos, and not for the honor of for me, right? In other words, so we do this within reason. Make sure you're doing it for the sake of Shabbos. Okay? One of my favorite mitzvahs on Erev Shabbos is, it's a mitzvah to taste, page 19, the dishes while they're being prepared, to make sure that they're appetizing. And that's my kind of a mitzvah, right? You get to taste all the food beforehand. Make sure it is good. Now, everyone according to his means, her means, should have meat, wine, other kafur Shabbos, right? Desirable to have fish. Okay, now all of this is, right, if you don't like meat, then you don't have meat. It's supposed to be oneg. It's supposed to be enjoyment, pleasure. Okay? So therefore, it's not so standardized. This is good Shabbos food. Good Shabbos food is what you enjoy having. Yeah. Okay? But you should want to make it, more than you have regularly during the week.
So
It's not required to have meat. Right. All right. If a person likes meat, likes fish, then you should have that on Shabbos. The person has a dislike. I mean, Ali doesn't eat meat, doesn't eat chicken, right? So when it's just she and I Friday night, so she's making fish, should I make something special for you? I'll have fish with you. That also works for me. Yeah. Look, with all of these things, you don't want to be a tzaddik on someone else's expense. You don't want to be machmir, right? Stringent. Listen, I'm very stringent, and therefore I want you to do this for me. That's not how it's supposed to work. You want to be stringent, right? But roll up your sleeves and be stringent. You don't become a tzaddik on someone else's account, right? I'm very strict on this, so I need you to do this and this and this for me, right? So, yeah. Okay. Baking challah for Shabbos, page 20. Customary for one to bake challah, right? Special braided. It's so interesting, right? We call our Shabbos bread challah. Now, that's actually fascinating. Because what is challah really? Look at the second paragraph on page 20. This is done to honor Shabbos and making specially its festive foods, and to enable women to fulfill their special mitzvah of separating challah. So what is challah? Challah is when baking, right? And this is important. This is not just for Shabbos. Whenever you're going to be baking 5 pounds of flour or more, so then you need to take off a portion of that. That's called challah. Okay? And that is supposed to be given to the Kohanim, right? That's a segment of the Jewish people, right? They're from the tribe of Levi, but they're the descendants of Aaron the Kohen, and you're supposed to give it to them. Now, nowadays, we don't know. Now, for a non-Kohen to eat that is a very serious offense. Nowadays, people think they're Kohanim. Are they really Kohanim? I would assume so. We don't know for sure, right? and everyone is in a state of ritual impurity because everyone's been to funerals, hospitals. So therefore, and the only way to purify oneself from that, the mikveh does not do the trick. You need to have the ashes of the paraduma, the red heifer, which we don't have nowadays. That's why whenever on some ranch in Texas, there's a red heifer, there's all this talk about, oh, Mashiach is coming, right? Well, we will need a red heifer, okay? And Mashiach is coming, and we're waiting. But a Kohen is not allowed to eat that. He's not allowed to eat that challah because A, do we know for sure he's a Kohen? No, we do not. B, he's tameh, he can't eat it. So therefore, the challah is taken off and it is burned. Okay? But keep in mind, the mitzvah is not to burn the challah. The mitzvah is to separate the challah and to give it to the Kohen. Nowadays, we can't give it to the Kohen, so we burn that. Okay? So what actually is the challah? The challah is the part that we take off, and nowadays we burn. So why are we calling our Shabbos bread challah? It's actually the non-challah. It's the anti-challah. It's the non-challah. So why are we calling it challah? So I think the reason we call it challah is because we want to associate this bread with the mitzvah. So we give it the name of the mitzvah that accompanies this. Now, this is good information to have. Why is that? Because it happens you're at a Friday night meal and people say, would you like to share a Devar Torah? Some words of Torah. So if it's on the Parsha, well, it's if you have something good and it's attached to one of the Parshas, right? The Parsha is the weekly Torah reading, so you have a 1 in 54 chance of getting of being invited on that week when you know something on that Parsha. So it's always good to have some things up your sleeve that are non-Parsha related, that are general related. So someone says, Orly, would you like to share a Devar Torah? So you could say, yes, I would. Thank you very much. Right? Why do we call the bread on Shabbos challah? Right? What is challah? Challah is what we take off when we're baking the bread. Right? It's not what we eat. So why is it called challah? And the answer could be, like we said, because we want to call it by the mitzvah that we do. Now, challah is one of the 3 special mitzvot of the woman that goes back all the way, according to our sages, it goes back to Sarah Imenu, the matriarch Sarah. And we're told actually that when Yitzchak married, when Isaac, an interesting thought, why is Yaakov Jacob in English? Why isn't Yitzchak Jisaac? I don't know. There's no answer. That's not a Shabbos Devar Torah. It just struck me. I don't know how the English works. It has its own. English is always crazy, right? So when Yitzchak, Isaac, married Rivka, it says that she went into the tent and she was Sarah. It was like she became Sarah. And the sages explain that the certain elements of Sarah that were there when Sarah was alive returned when Yitzchak married Rivka, right? What were those 3 elements? So we say Ner Daluk, there was the candle that was burning. There was the Bracha Be'isa, there was the blessing in the dough, and there was a cloud that was resting above the tent. This corresponds to the 3 special mitzvot of the woman, right? Which is challah, separating the challah. Not to say that a man, if he's baking, wouldn't separate challah, he does. But typically this is one of the woman mitzvot. The Shabbos candles, which we'll come to soon, right? And that was the ner that was burning, and family purity. And it's these three mitzvot where there is a whole beautiful Yehi Ratzon. Yehi Ratzon means let it be the will. It's a supplication. So there's a beautiful supplication that is said when women are lighting candles on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and when they separate the challah, and when they go to the mikvah. Okay. So, just quickly, C21, several laws applying to the mitzvah of separating challah. You separate a piece, the challah, from the dough, any one of the 5 grains, right? One may not eat any product made of dough before a piece was separated from it, right? You might have seen on the boxes of shmura matzah, right? It had a big sticker that said challah genumen, something like that, which is Yiddish for challah has been separated. Okay, and the mitzvah of separating a piece from the dough is derived from the verse, you must separate the first portion of your dough as a dough offering. Okay, good. How to separate challah? I'm not going to go in. Okay, separate, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, on 23, right? If any of you guys want, be in touch with Natalie. Whenever Natalie bakes challah, she does a whole bunch at once. Or actually, every few Thursdays, a bunch of women come over Thursday afternoon and they bake challah for all of the Hillel students, right? So if you ever like to join that, be in touch with Natalie. And of course, she separates the challah, right? So you'll get to see live action on that. Okay. All right. As we mentioned on page 23 at the top, the piece of dough separated may not be eaten. It should be burned or wrapped up and placed in the garbage, not be thrown away in a degrading manner. Okay. Ideally, the woman does the mitzvah. Otherwise, then a man does it. Okay. Good. Cleaning the house, preparing it for Shabbos. Yeah. So you want to clean the house and make it special, clean, nice for Shabbos, right? And ideally Shabbos table should be set while it's still day, right? So that when you come home Friday night, so everything is all set to begin the meal, right? One of the things that we do, we sing Shalom Aleichem, right? And that's based on what we're welcoming the Malachi Hashares, the first stanza, which is the ministering angels. And the next 3 stanzas are Malachi HaShalom, the angels of Shalom, of peace. And that's based on the famous Gemara in Shabbos, that there are 2 angels that accompany a person home on Friday night. One of them is the good angel, one of them is the bad angel. If the table's all set and Shabbos is all ready to go, the good angel gives a bracha, so too for next week, and the other angel has to answer Amen. If things are in disarray, the bad angel says, so too next week, and the good angel has to answer Amen. That's what the first stanza is. Shalom Aleichem Malachei Hashares, angels that are ministering, that are arguing, right? But after that, the next stanza is Boachem, welcome Malachei Hashalom, angels of peace, because at that point, everything is all set and close and beauty for Shabbos. Famous story is that a husband complained to one of the great rabbis in Bnei Brak. His name was the Stipler Rav, he was known, right? That on Friday, his wife just doesn't get everything done on time for Shabbos. It's very troubling. So he had sage advice for him. He said, grab a broom, right? Yeah. Help out. Okay. Now, the table should come with a tablecloth. Yes, right. Okay. Some of the custom to lay 2 tablecloths on the table. Okay. With a lot of these things, there is no limit to some have the custom to. Okay. And this is, if I'm writing a book, I have to cover all angles, right? And I have to often adopt the most stringent, strict approach, right? Because it's right. But you want to have 1 tablecloth, 2. You want it to be nice for you. You don't want you. you don't want to overload yourself in order to cover this custom and that custom, this custom, that custom. Okay. Clothes, you should have special clothes for Shabbos. Okay, right? Yeah, right. Washing, taking a haircut. Okay, take a shower beforehand. Right, do it in honor of Shabbos. Cut fingernails on Friday. Okay. Um, okay, so there is based on Kabbalah. There is based on Jewish mysticism. This idea that you don't want the nail clippings to fall on the floor. It could affect a pregnant woman, right? So so you do it. You know, typically we don't bury them, we don't burn them, right? But right, I clip my nails over the toilet. It goes in there. I give it a flush, but I don't have it jumping around. What you see over here is there also is a custom not to cut our fingernails or toenails in order, one after the other. That's also a Kabbalistic idea. And when they are doing a tahara, the tahara is the preparation of a body after death for burial. So there's a whole process of washing and trimming the nails and cleansing the body and then clothing the body in the special burial garments that a person is buried in. So there we cut the nail, we cut it in order. So therefore, the custom is not to cut it, not to cut our nails in direct order. Okay, 28, you don't want to have a major meal on Friday afternoon because you want to go into Shabbos with an appetite. Okay, yeah, snacking, stuff like that is not an issue, but you wouldn't want to, sit down to a big meal on Friday, okay? On Friday afternoon, page 30, right? You don't do any substantial labor, okay, right? Okay. Shabbos needs is certainly fine. Look, in our world today, right? So you want to try to get home. It's not always so easy in terms of people's jobs. You have a nice setup at Hebrew Academy, right? Orly, with you, it's a little more challenging. All right? When Shabbos comes early on
Yeah, I'm able to get off.
a little earlier. Yeah. Shavi, how was it for you with schooling and stuff?
School's done. So
I'm sorry?
school is done now.
It's all done.
It's just
Okay.
my own studies.
Yeah. So when you're looking for a job, so one of the things you need to make sure that is comes Friday. Yeah, my daughter Devora, she's working as an OT now, and but now where she's working now, her supervisor is an Orthodox man. So they work it out together that she doesn't have a problem on the short Fridays. But it takes navigating. Okay, ideally we wouldn't go on a big trip 31. Okay, big travel trip when it comes to Friday. Sure.
28.
Yes.
I'm confused by the double not on A. So is it don't?
One should not eat the kind of fasting on Friday that one is not wont to eat during the week, such as a friend's reunion. Don't eat a festive meal that's more than a regular weekday meal. That one is want, right? Not won't, but want. That one is not want. That one would not usually eat. Yeah, we don't really use that word want so much. Yeah, the one would not normally eat during the week, right? A friend's reunion, a siyum from the right. So you wouldn't schedule a festive meal on a Friday afternoon. Yeah, that's all that's saying, right? Right? A meal celebrating a mitzvah, which was on Friday, a circumcision or pidyon haben. So you'd have that earlier in the day. Right? That's why the one to the left has a smiling sun because I guess it's in the morning, right? I guess that's toward the east, right? Whereas the angry sun, S-U-N, right, is the one on the right because it's getting a little bit late. Okay, yeah. Okay, and on page 29, we have two smiling suns because either way, he's having a snack, which is fine, right? And a normal meal, right? One can have, right? But again, you want to go into Shabbos with an appetite. You don't want to go in voraciously hungry, right? It's also not so enjoyable, but you do want to go in with a bit of an appetite. Okay. Food preparations. All right, we're not going to go into that much over here. Okay, but food must be all cooked before Shabbos, right? There are exceptions, right? Let's say, we have a custom, our Ashkenazic custom, Sfardim also, to have cholent, they call it chamim, okay? And so that is something that is a stew that is put up on, you guys are experts already on your cholent from the Kiddush crew, right? That is a stew that is put up on Friday afternoon, and it cooks through the night, and then it's eaten Shabbos day. The reason for that is there were the Tzedukim. Tzedukim are like the Karaites of today. You guys familiar with the Karaites? So Karaites are a group that broke off from mainstream Judaism centuries ago. And like the Tzedukim in the time of the Talmud, they rejected the Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral Torah, and only go with the written Torah. That's all they go with. So it says in the written Torah, Lo tevaru eish b'chol moshvotechem. There should not be any fire burning in your dwelling places. So we, the sages, understand that you can't ignite a fire. You can't extinguish a fire. But if a fire is left burning, right, that's not a problem. For them, they literally sit in the dark the whole Shabbos because you can't have any fires burning. So they literally sit in the dark. They certainly don't have any hot food come Shabbos afternoon. How are you possibly going to have any hot food? So therefore, in order to show that we follow and we accept the teachings of the oral Torah, so we dafka means we go out of our way to make sure to try to have hot food Shabbos afternoon. Okay, that's where our cholent custom comes from. But all the cooking and baking must be done before Shabbos. Even the cholent, certainly ideally, it needs to be fully cooked before Shabbos. It needs to be edible before Shabbos. It doesn't really have to be, as long as it's in a place where it's not going to be touched, it's not going to be moved, it's not going to be tinkered with, right? But being that at times you do need to move things around, and if it's not fully cooked, moving it around is a problem. Moving it around is going to expedite the cooking, and that is Chilul Shabbat. That is desecrating the Shabbos, right? By doing anything that will expedite the cooking on Shabbos, that's considered to be cooking, right? So therefore, but in general, right, the food, it's all done before Shabbos. So therefore, food that pressure requires grinding, mixing two substances into one instant with a mass, squeezing juice. All of this must be prepared before Shabbos. Okay, and that is the busy. Okay, keeping food warm, 36. Food which one wishes to serve warm on Shabbos should be placed on a source of heat after they are cooked. The source of heat on which the food is placed should be a special Shabbos hot plate or a metal sheet covering the stovetop. Right, that is known as a blech. Okay. I assume that's a Yiddish word, right? Doesn't sound English or French, right? So the blech is the cover that we have that we cover over the flame. All the hot water needed for drinking and food purposes on Shabbos should be boiled in advance. It should then be kept hot in a Shabbos kettle or urn, placed on the Shabbos hot plate or the metal sheet. Okay? So over there, the idea is we want, well, the Gemara's term is Shema Yachate. You might come to stoke the flame. Okay? That's why in the Talmudic time ovens, there were coals in the oven. So you needed to remove the coals and sweep it out before Shabbos, lest you'll come to stoke those coals, stoke the flames, to keep things good and hot. So we don't do that, but we do have a blech that covers over the fire, and it doesn't have to cover over the controls. Okay? But as long as it's covering over the fire, that serves as a reminder not to tinker with anything, and whatever it is, right? Whatever, right? You can't do anything to expedite anything once Shabbos begins. You leave it as it is. Therefore, ideally, it's all cooked before Shabbos, and you're just leaving it on to keep. You're leaving it on to keep things warm. There's, I think, Rabbi Akiva Tates, in his wonderful book Living Inspired. I think that's where I saw this. If we have Shabbos every week, it means that the lesson of Shabbos is such an important lesson that we need to learn that, to experience that lesson on a weekly basis. So there are many lessons of Shabbos, but what is perhaps arguably the most important lesson of Shabbos? So Shabbos is like life, meaning you have the whole week to prepare. Prepare. Shabbos comes, stop. Whatever's been prepared, you're good to go. Whatever's not been prepared, that's it. You can't do anything about it. And that is our view on life. Life is a gift that's given to us, right? I think we mentioned last week the mashal, the parable of the Chafetz Chaim, the diamonds in the street, right? We can gather as much as we can. Life is a chance, is an opportunity to do, and then once our soul is summoned up above and leaves our body, whatever has been done has been done. Whatever has not been done cannot get done. So Shabbos reminds us of the precious gift of life, and there's a time to prepare, and there's a time when one can no longer prepare, and one can only enjoy that which one prepared in advance. Okay? So all of that needs to be done. So all the food should be all done in advance. We want to keep things warm. We do it on a blech, right? A crock pot would also work, right? But ideally, you'd be taking off the control or turning it around so the control is not accessible, so you won't have any possibility of tinkering, and then that remains there, right? Or using an electric hot plate, right? Also, so there you want to cover the control or the control, right? Because there you don't have the clear reminder like you have, which is the blech, that sheet of metal that goes on top of the fire. So there you want to have another way of reminding yourself. Either you could usually pull off the little plastic knob, right, which you used to go 0, 1, 2, 3, or turn it around so that's facing the wall, so you don't have access. Right? When it comes to these blechs, you have to be careful not to try to do it yourself. One year in Israel, now we're living in Israel, Pesach was coming, so we went to a guy who worked with metal and tin, whatever he worked with, and we had him make for us a cover for our stovetop, which was a metal pan, and with 4 things cut out, and little tripods over there, and that fit right onto our stovetop. And we use that. We didn't have to worry about cleaning the grates and cleaning this and cleaning that, trying to kasha that. We just put it on. Everything was great. And of course, we had a blech. So for Shabbos, we had a blech that went on top. And we're having our Pesach Seder. And that year was Shmit, whatever. There was a special year in Israel. And we had a whole bunch of boys in yeshiva that I taught at over. And towards the end of the Seder, we're all starting to feel a little bit woozy. Maybe it was the wine, this, that. I don't know. We finish the Seder, the guys walk back to the yeshiva. We all go to sleep. Baruch Hashem, thank God. Natalie woke up in the middle of the night and thought she smelled something, and she went and she opened up the kitchen window. By the next morning, Natalie and I were so sick that we literally crawled up the steps to our neighbor and said, help us. We can't take care of the kids. We're really, really sick. And they went over to the doctor who lived a few doors down. And what ended up happening was there was some sort of a chemical reaction that was taking place between the blech and those tripods. And it was giving off this noxious, poisonous fumes. And Baruch Hashem, Natalie opened the window in the middle of the night. But yeah, you need a blech. You go to one of the kosher stores and you buy a blech. No DIY, right? Don't figure, let me do it myself. Let me go to Lowe's or Home Depot, and just stay simple. Okay. Yes.
When it talks about mixing two substances into one indistinguishable mass,
yeah,
does that go for drinks as well?
No.
Okay.
No, it's only substances. Okay. Yeah, and that actually is one of the sidura de pat, one of the order of making the bread, which is lash, kneading. So you're taking a liquid, you're taking the flour, and you are mixing two substances into one indistinguishable mass. Okay? Doesn't apply to liquids. You want to mix some powder into a liquid. That's whatever. That's perfectly fine. Okay, preparing tea essence. Okay. So when it comes to the issues of cooking on Shabbos, which is going to be a major part of this sefer, of this book, and really a major part of the Shabbos laws that are very applicable to us in a very, very relevant way. So let's just get some terms down. Kli means vessel. Kli Rishon is the first vessel, meaning that which contained the food on the fire. It gets poured from that into another vessel. That second vessel is called a Kli Sheni. Okay? It gets poured into another vessel. That's called a Kli Shlishi. Okay. So Kli Rishon is the original. So let's say when you have so if you have a hot water urn, that is your Kli Rishon. The cup that you pour the water into, that is the Kli Sheni. Okay? Now, as we are transferring from one Kli to another Kli, that's called Iroi, pouring. So Iroi Kli Rishon is when it's going from the hot water urn into your cup. Now, that is going to be it will not cook as much as the Kli Rishon itself, but it will cook more than the Kli Sheni. The Kli Sheni already, so its walls are cold, right? So when something hot goes in there, the heat's going to dissipate, right? To reach some sort of equilibrium, it's going to cool off. But as it's going down there direct, it's not as hot as it is when it's in the pot, the Kli Rishon, but it's hotter than it is and more susceptible towards actually cooking than when it is in the Kli Sheni. Okay. So the general rule we have is something in a kli rishon will cook. In a kli sheni, it will not cook. Okay? So we never add anything into a kli rishon on Shabbos, whether it's on the fire or not on the fire. You don't add anything into that kli rishon. There are exceptions, we'll come to that, but let's just say in general, you don't put anything into a kli rishon on Shabbos. Kli sheni is less of an issue because kli sheni does not normally cook. But there are certain things called the kalei habishul. Bishul is cooking. Kal means light or easily. Certain things are easily cooked, and they will cook even in a kli sheni. Hello, Yosef. Right? Please. This is down memory lane. This is this is one of our from a previous iteration of our Jewish journeys. So the classic example of something that cooks easily is tea. Tea leaves, right? They are thin, they are dry, they cook super easily. So tea is something that will cook even in a kli sheni. So if I were to take my mug and take water from the hot water urn. Now, of course, we're talking about an urn or a hot water source that's not going to be getting refilled. For example, right? If you have let's say a water dispenser, hot water, cold water, with a 5-gallon jug on top, right? So when you take out hot water, what happens? It refills, cold water goes and fills that area. And what happens to that? It gets cooked. So you can't take any hot water out from such an arrangement. We're talking about where either the hot water has been turned off before Shabbos, or you've got a separate, like we have on the card here, a separate urn, where any hot water that comes out is not being replaced along the way. Okay, so that's just right, and that goes for using hot water at all on Shabbos, right? Turning on the hot water on the sink on Shabbos is a problem, because what happens when you're taking hot water? Cold water is going into your boiler and getting cooked on Shabbos. So that we can't do. So we're talking over here, if I were to take water out of my hot water urn, now I have my cup. The hot water urn is the kli rishon, the first primary. My mug is the kli sheni. If I put in a tea bag, we've got a problem, right? Because it's kale bishul. That cooks easily, and therefore that's the classic item that gets cooked even in a kli sheni. Am I clear with all the terms? These are terms I'll be using a lot, right? It gets cooked even in a kli sheni. Therefore, what they suggest is preparing tea essence, and that's certainly the old school classic way of doing it, and that is you're going to cook up a super thick tea on Shabbos, right? Instead of 1 bag of tea for a cup, you're going to have 10 bags of tea in there, right? And you're making a tea concentrate. You'll keep that then warm the whole Shabbos, and that way it's already been cooked and it's warm, and therefore it's not going to recook again. And then you take your hot water, you add that in. There are no tea leaves to speak about, and everything is glatt kosher, right? Everything is perfectly kosher. And that's what they're discussing over here. Typically, we have an easier method. Yosef, what is our easier method? Huh? Okay, or we use a tea bag, a kli shlishi. Okay, even things that will easily cook in even things that are easily cooked and therefore will cook in a kli sheni, it will not cook in a kli shlishi. So the easiest way to make tea is you take a mug, a cup, and water comes out of the urn kli rishon, cup, kli sheni. Take it from there and pour it into another cup. That now is your kli shlishi, and then you can do your tea in there without a problem. Because even things that are easily cooked and cook in a kli sheni do not cook in a kli shlishi, in the third kli, the third vessel. Okay? Yes.
So for like instant coffee.
Okay. Yes.
Because isn't instant coffee,
It's already cooked.
Okay.
Right? It's freeze dry, whatever they do with that, right? It's already cooked, right? But I would say just get into the habit of always doing a kli shlishi. And that way it's just simple and you don't have to think too
Is
much.
there a certain period of time you need to wait between going from cup to cup?
No.
Or just...
No, that's a good question, but you do not. You do not. Okay. Let's look at let's do another couple of things. Washing fruit, page 38. So we're up to, right? Yeah. Fruits and vegetables which are mixed with dirt and other unwanted matters should be washed before Shabbos. One should not wash them on Shabbos, as likely one will transgress the prohibition of selecting. Okay, so that's if we're talking about real dirt being mixed in. But the regular rinsing off of a fruit or a vegetable beforehand, that is not, there's no discernible thing that's being washed off, even if it is a little bit dirt, right? So we can wash fruits and vegetables on Shabbos. If it's really mixed up with with dirt, but we're not living on the farm, and the fruits and vegetables that we buy is not all mixed up with dirt. Okay, so page 40, I mentioned that. That's the makeh bepatish. Remember, the 39th malacha was making a kli. Cans, food packages, milk containers, wine bottles, soda bottles, we'll talk about soon, should preferably be opened before Shabbos. Additional detail be found in section 2. Okay, why is that? Because otherwise, depending on, right, in other words, opening up a jar, a glass bottle of, I don't know, of pickles, right? That's not a problem, right? Because that was a cover. It was on. I took the cover off. That's like opening up a door. That's not going to be an issue at all. But opening a can, I'm cutting through. It was one unit, and now I'm cutting through. Right. When they seal the can, what do? Right. So right, the cover goes on, and then it gets crimped all around. I'm not taking off the cover that they put on. I'm cutting through the cover that they put on. So that became one unit, and now I'm turning it into a kli. Okay? So ideally, boxes of cereal, things like that, right? If they're new, right, should be opened up before Shabbos. If not, so the way to do a can of tuna is you want to render it a non-kli before you before you open it. So what do? You make a hole in the bottom, start in the bottom, make a hole in the bottom, right? Right? And that way, once you take off, explain Yosef, that way what happens? Once you take off,
well, if you don't, then it's gonna become a basil. To make it
right,
non-use, you can make 2 holes and
make a hole in the bottom, and that way when I take off the cover, it's not a kli. It's not a usable kli. It's something with a hole in the bottom, and it's not going to be working.
So a wine bottle, is that only for the screw top ones, or is it when you...
So a cork is not a problem. A cork is just something that's in the way, and you're getting it out of the way, right?
What about the plastic paper on the outside? Well, whatever that...
So that would just need to be torn, right? That's not becoming a kli. The paper is not becoming a kli. That's just in your way, right? And it was a bottle, and it was a cork, and you're taking it out, right? When it comes to the cap, the metal cap on less expensive bottles of wine, where it has the ring on the bottom, so there, when you take that off and you break off that ring, now you've got yourself a kli, and that is different than soda bottles, and that's what we'll do next week. We'll pick up over there. Okay? Spoiler alert, you can open soda bottles. There are some people who don't, but I do. Right? There's a good reason too, and I do. Okay, good. We'll pick up here next week, my friends. Good. Yeshikach, everybody.